the topic being diversity, equity, and inclusion, a beginning conversation. So again, thanks to all board members who were able to make it today. And thank you as well to the staff. We're going to be introduced to all of them. So thank you in advance for your time. We know how busy this start of school year calendar is. So for you to be able to break away and join us is terrific. So thank you. Okay. Dr. Smith, I will turn it over to you.
Absolutely. So I just want to say, first, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time out of a very busy day. We're looking forward to having this beginning conversation. I think that would be the piece I would underline. This is something we've been talking about and thinking about for some time, but at least with all of you as a board, this is really our first conversation, and so we're looking forward to getting into it. And I'll turn it over to Chuck, who will kind of set the format for us, and then he can introduce the rest of our participants.
Sure. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad to have this beginning conversation with all of you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The way I've structured today is basically in 3 parts. I'm going to start by talking about what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, and then why it's important that we address it in our schools. First, and then we'll talk about how we address it both through the curriculum and through our policy and practice. So it's basically 3 parts: the what and the why, then the how in 2 parts, curriculum and then policy and practice. So what I'd like to ask is perhaps let us do each of those sections, go through the presentation, and then we'll stop after each section, and you guys can then ask questions, make comments, and we can have a discussion. And then I'll leave time at the end for us to have a broader discussion, if that's okay. Got it?
Yep.
I also made sure you had paper and pens, at least they were supposed to do that,
Okay.
so that you can take notes while we talk. I have with me here today Karen Brennicky, who is our coordinator for humanities K through 8, Michael Gordon, who is the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and by Zoom we have some of our high school teachers, Laura Fayek, Molly Palmer, and Hala Varani. They'll be talking specifically about high school. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so I thought it would be a good idea to just start with what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, at least what we mean by them here in the Wilton Public Schools. So diversity is really about making sure that the wonderful diversity in the world is represented in our organization and in our curriculum. Equity refers more to our policies and practices that ensure that everybody is treated fairly, that there's equality of opportunity and fairness and access to information and resources. And inclusion is really about school culture, making sure that everybody feels like they belong, that they have a voice, and that they're able to participate in, again, all of the wonderful things that we have. Now, why is that important? There are a bunch of different reasons that I'm going to go through. I think the first and most important is that differences are a part of being human, right? And it has been in the past, it is now, and it will be in our students' future, particularly with the increasing globalization of our society. Students need to be able to understand differences, and they also need to be able to work productively with a diverse group of people. It affects their success in their future careers and in college, and currently as well. We also have to keep in mind that by understanding differences, we're helping our students to grow cognitively, right? That idea of being able to take multiple perspectives helps our students to think more critically and more creatively. And then finally, I think when we create a school environment where students feel safe, where they feel respected, where we believe that everybody adds value, we're creating adults who will go out into the world with that expectation and hopefully help to create a better world. I'll get the right one. I also think it's really important that we understand that there are demographic changes occurring in Wilton. So the graph that you have up there shows the ethnic makeup of the student body for the past 20 years, from 2002 2021. You can see that probably back in 2002, about 2 or 3% of our students were would be considered from other than a white European background. But now it's 1 in 3 of our students. You know, I think these changes have occurred gradually in our community, but they are dramatic. And that's what I meant previously, that our students are currently dealing with a lot of diversity. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that they are equipped to deal with it effectively and that they understand it. All right, now before we get into how we address diversity, equity, and inclusion in our schools through curriculum and instruction, I just wanted to pause for a minute and see whether anybody had any questions or comments.
Actually, it's 1 in 4.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
yes, it's
It's 25%.
25%. Thank you. We're good to go?
This is the latest census data?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. So when it comes to curriculum instruction, I'm going to provide some broad overview of how we approach this topic, and then I'm going to turn it over to Karen to talk a little bit more specifically about how we do it in the humanities in kindergarten through 8th grade, and then we'll have our high school friends talk a little bit about how it's addressed at the high school. So if I were to provide you with one big idea about how we approach diversity, equity, and inclusion, it would be the concept of mirrors and windows. And I think you'll hear that throughout our presentation today. So one of the things that we need to do is to facilitate our students' development. You know, we're in partnership with parents to make sure that kids develop a good self-identity and a good understanding of the way they fit in the world. And this touches on the concept of becoming. Our kids are becoming people, and we need to help support them in developing that sense of what they could become, right? And to do that, we do that both by providing them with resources and materials that reflect their own culture, right? That's the mirror. So when students see themselves represented in instructional materials and in books, it helps them develop a positive sense of belonging in the school community. A window is, like it says up there, a resource that offers students a view into somebody else's experience. It helps them to develop a broader understanding of the world. And so students really need both of those. They need to have a mirror into what their own identity is, their own culture, that helps them to develop and to understand where they fit in the world. But they also have to have an understanding of what other people's identities and experiences are, so that kids can understand where they fit, what they could become. Does that make sense? I hope so. So the other thing I wanted to do was to relate to some of the work that we've been doing around the portrait of the graduate. So whenever we talk about how we are going to address something in schools, we always start with the end in mind. What is it that we want students to know and be able to do? And so what I'm putting up here are some of the portrait of the graduate learning targets that reflect some of the things that we want students to know and be able to do in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you think about things like becoming a multiliterate scholar, or becoming a courageous ethical leader, or an active socially sensitive citizen, there are certain basic competencies we want students to be able to develop. And one of those competencies is recognizing perspectives. It kind of cuts across some of those, what are we calling those, attributes of the graduate. I also thought this would give you a good sense of what we call developmentally appropriate progressions for students, what it is we want students to know and be able to do at each of the different levels. So you'll notice here for recognizing perspectives, at the primary elementary level, what we want students to leave Miller Driscoll knowing and being able to do is to identify their own feelings about certain situations and identify the feelings of others. As we move through Cider Mill, the upper elementary, that becomes a little bit more nuanced and sophisticated. So we want students to not only identify, but to describe what their own perspective on situations, events, or issues are. Identify the perspectives of other people and groups, and explain how, this is where it gets even more sophisticated, it can explain how access to knowledge, technology, and resources affects viewpoints and behaviors. Again, at middle school, that gets even more sophisticated. They can analyze influential factors that affect their own perspective, as well as the perspectives of different cultures and groups. And by the time they're at the high school, we've gone from identifying to describing to analyzing, now evaluating how perspectives are created and influenced by interactions, experiences, and relationships. And they can predict how differential access to perspectives may affect their understanding. Here's another competency, and it's cultural awareness. So at the lower elementary, we want students to identify when others have ideas that are different than their own, identify types of words and behaviors that may hurt others, and explain the importance of using their words to talk to others about how they feel. When we get to the upper elementary, explain how my beliefs affect how I understand information, and identify bias in things that I read, see, and hear. And explain how the words and behaviors I use can help me communicate with others. At the middle school, we're talking about recognizing how cultural beliefs and biases affect how we create, share, and receive information, recognizing and explaining how diverse audiences may infer different meanings from the same information, explain how verbal and nonverbal cues may help or hinder my communication with diverse audiences. And by the high school, we're getting into rather sophisticated analysis of how cultural beliefs, bias, and assumptions influence the way we generate and receive information, and so forth. Okay? And then finally, I gave you an example of a social emotional learning target, and that has to do with recognizing individual and group similarities and differences. I'm not going to read through these, I know you all can read, but it gives you a sense of exactly what it is that we're expecting kids to know and be able to do, and the progression from one level to the other. These competencies live in various places in the curriculum. A lot of it is in humanities, but things like digital citizenship is one of the areas in which we visit and revisit many of these learning targets. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, so I just kind of want to clarify the different ways in which we can approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there are three main approaches that I kind of wanted to explain. The first is multicultural education, which focuses on celebrating diversity and centers around creating positive social interactions across differences. And this is where our diversity and inclusion efforts live. And it's really about exposing all students to multiple perspectives and other cultures, and ensuring that students of color see themselves represented in the curriculum. And the goal there basically is social harmony. Social justice education focuses on exploring how society's social and political aspirations and realities play out. We have a lot of aspirations as a culture, as a society, and we want students to understand what those aspirations are compared to the reality, and then figure out what they need to do as as citizens, to make sure that we're actualizing our aspirations. And this is where our anti-bias efforts live. And it's really about critical consciousness, critical thinking. Culturally responsive teaching focuses on improving the learning capacity of diverse students who may learn differently based upon their cultural backgrounds. It centers around the affective and cognitive aspects of teaching and learning, and this is where we're trying to close the gap close the achievement gap. And it really is about developing the information processing of students by capitalizing on the way they learn, which may be based on cultural differences. And the goal here is independent learning. So one of the examples I can give is in response to culturally responsive teaching. There's this concept of the way we approach learning can be very individualistic or collective. And certain cultures kind of fall into one of those two buckets. It so happens that the United States tends to approach learning from a very individualistic approach. It's very much about personal responsibility, kind of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's how we approach learning in the United States, and in much of Western Europe as well. On the other side are cultures which are more collectivist in nature, where it's not so much about the individual as it is about the group, and that learning occurs within group settings. And so one of the things that when teachers are thinking about their students and how they learn best, they may want to think about how they can balance both an individualistic approach to learning as well as a collectivist approach. Now, the thing I want you to understand is that although we say Americans are individualistic, that doesn't mean that every single American approaches learning that way, right? When we talk about cooperative learning, peer tutoring, group work, those are ways in which everybody can benefit from learning, right? It's not an either or. And what's important to understand is that this is kind of within the context of responsive lesson planning. So if you have a student who's struggling, there are a number of things that you need to consider to help accelerate their learning. One of those might be their cultural background. And what aspects of that culture might inform ways in which you may work with that particular student to accelerate their learning. Things like, maybe I should think about how I can leverage cooperative learning for this particular student. Another way of doing it is storifying things, making it into a story, making sure that when you introduce a lesson that you are connecting it to prior learning, connecting it to the prior experiences of that particular student. Okay? Now, I do believe you received the Connecticut State Board of Ed position statement on culturally responsive education, and the joint statement on the ability for culturally responsive education. I hope you had a chance to read it. Kevin, did you want to give them an opportunity to read it?
Yeah. So you have it, and if you didn't have a chance to look at it, we don't need to go into depth or detail, but I think as Chuck was just describing, this joint statement that was released maybe about a month ago, I think really captures the spirit, certainly the spirit of what we're aiming for here in the Wilton Public Schools. But I think it also was well-timed in that all of the kind of major organizational stakeholders in the state came together around this idea and were able to kind of develop this platform upon which we can lean, as we are attempting to describe our work and share our work and promote the work that we're doing with kids. But there's some. I just thought it was very well crafted and really zeroes in on what's most important, and that's about making sure that our instructional approach really is factoring all the considerations that go into helping to learn and grow individual kids, and certainly cultural background is a major piece of that.
There are a couple of quotes from here that I think are particularly relevant. Maybe I could read them out loud. The Connecticut State Board of Education understands that culturally responsive educators become conduits of learning by affirming their content expertise through their own identities. As a result, the learning environment establishes a reciprocal relationship of respect between the educator and the students. Thus, cultural backgrounds become the foundation of the knowledge base for learning and academic success. The State Board of Ed also understands that family engagement and community partnerships are necessary to help close the historically persistent gaps that have threatened our students' success for generations. Under such empowering learning conditions, culturally responsive education leverages critical inquiry to inform approaches against racism, discrimination, bias, and oppression. And then finally, we want our students to graduate as responsible, well-rounded, and productive citizens who are ready to engage with others and thrive in our interconnected, diverse global society. Our students are best served when empowered with the tools to understand and investigate the countless lived experiences that exist in the world around them. So I think those two quotes resonated most with me. And I think encapsulate the approach that he has taken here in the work of schools.
Chuck, where's the one that you just read?
It's in the second one, the joint statement
Positions.
on the back.
Isn't that the position statement on culturally responsive education for
Yeah.
the state board of ed?
The first paragraph I read was from the position statement.
Yep.
It's, yeah. The
This one,
second
from this
one.
one? It's from this one.
From the second one. Right there on the back, I think it's the second paragraph.
Where was the first one?
It's the
This paragraph.
6th paragraph on the first page.
So, just,
Do you want us to say stuff or
Sure.
still going? It's okay. Just
I
let us
was
know.
good about to transition to Karen. This might be a good
Good place to
opportunity.
start.
Okay.
so, both those statements you just read, I had highlighted myself. The first one, though, at some point in time, I think it needs to be unpacked more.
Okay.
To kind of talk about what does that mean for Wilton? And how does that, work for us? Because this is, the Connecticut board reflects the circumstances of the entire state, where our district has some different circumstances. So I just want to do more, learn more about that. And the second statement very much resonated with me, and how that fits in with the portrait of the graduate, and what our overarching, I think, community goal should look like as we develop this project.
Great. I'm happy to.
Anyone else have comments? I just, again, speaking to someone else person here. The first one you read, and maybe this is, I'm just going to emphasize Bruce's point there, when it states that cultural backgrounds become the foundation, I have a hard time understanding that.
Okay.
Kind of questioning, it's one piece of a foundation. I don't know
Sure.
that it's the foundation. So I don't want us to get into just your cultural label. And then the second one that you read, I kind of think, well, gosh, if we could keep it that focused and that simple, that might be it. So, okay.
I do think it's important to understand, we said this before, mirrors and windows.
Yeah.
Teachers need to develop close relationships with students, right? And in order to do that, we have to have a deep understanding of each other's identities, our backgrounds, and it's not the only thing, I agree with you, but it is very foundational to developing a relationship, to understand where I am as a teacher, what I bring to our relationship, and more importantly, understanding what your students bring to the relationship as well. And that's how I read that first paragraph.
Okay. Understood.
Okay, yeah, I've got a question. So when we're reading these, I've been reading them and just listening to you kind of talk. What are you hoping from us out of this? Are you hoping that we're going to comment and share our thoughts about things? Do you want us to help with thinking about a position statement for like a policy for us? Like what's our hope here?
Yeah, so at the very end, I think Kevin is going to be sharing the policy with you, which I
Okay.
think is very appropriate. I also think that part of the purpose here today is to simply make sure that everybody understands how we're approaching
Yeah.
these rather sensitive issues.
Okay.
And I hope you will take away from this that we're doing it in a very thoughtful and considered way with the best interests of our students and families in mind.
Okay.
Right. Well said.
All right. Your turn.
All right, so we're ready. You may have more questions. So I think to your question too, I think maybe what Karen's going to talk about.
So what you see on this slide is a timeline of the work to date. So in 2018-19, that school year was our first full year of implementation of social studies units of study that were fully aligned to the Connecticut Social Studies frameworks. And why that's important is the Connecticut Social Studies frameworks united the 2010 call to have students college and career ready by adding a third aim, beyond college, beyond career, but to be prepared for civic life, so that they be aware of their changing cultural and physical environments, so that they know the past and its impact on the present and future, and so that they read, write, and think deeply and act in ways that promote the common good. Back in the fall of 2019, I presented the K-8 Social Studies 6141 to you, and we talked a little bit about the disciplinary thinking that the frameworks require of our kids, to think like a historian, to think about what the past means, and what people in the past were thinking about and talking about, and how that impacted how they behaved in the ways that they did. To think like geographers, thinking that focuses on place and space, and seeking to understand why humans deal with them in the ways that they do and with what consequences. Thinking like an economist, comparing the marginal costs to the marginal benefits to allocate resources in a manner that maximizes human well-being. And finally, civic-minded thinking, which deals with how power flows. In that framework, we talked about some professional learning that we were going to be engaging in around student-centered inquiry, the vertical progression of writing skills, kindergarten through 8th grade, and cultural and linguistic responsiveness, inclusive of an understanding of all social barriers that impact equity. Beginning in January of 2020, our first group started attending the TC Equity and Inclusion Institutes, which we continue to send teachers to now, all the way through, and plan to send teachers to in the coming school year. It's not the only professional learning that we've engaged in. We've engaged in some professional learning that Michael has planned as well, that has moved us toward more cultural, responsive pedagogical practices.
I'm sorry, is TC Teachers College?
I'm sorry, it is Teachers College.
Thank you.
You for clarifying. Last year, in 2020-21, a grant opportunity was brought to the 8th grade social studies team to integrate more diverse perspectives through primary and secondary sources into their units of study, so that we can analyze perspective across texts routinely. And to engage in exploring diverse perspectives. They weren't ultimately awarded the grant, but they are committed to engaging in that work. And this summer, they worked to align primary and secondary sources from both the historical perspective that probably most of us grew up with, along with more diverse perspectives for voices that have previously been marginalized. We've been partnering with Pablo Wolf, who is co-author of the Civically Engaged Classroom, along with Mary Aaronworth, who is a senior staff developer at Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. He has subsequently created a coalition for civically engaged educators, which is a place where he works to connect educators engaged in this work across the country. And he put our 8th grade team in touch with Sharif Phelan from Keller, Texas. She's a curriculum coordinator. She's K-12, unlike me, I'm K-8. And she shared their experience as well as some documents that they have used to support parents in understanding the work that we're engaging in. Moving forward then, in the coming year, we are looking to create those conditions for civically engaged instruction, culturally responsive instruction, those safe, respectful classroom communities, encouraging curiosity and risk-taking. We have a lot of work to do within critical literacies, and you're starting to see in the information age that the way your kids are probably approaching informational text is very different. Well, at least I almost gave my age, and now I'm hyper aware that we are recording, so I'm not going to do that, but I'm older. I was taught nonfiction is true and fiction is stories that are made up. That's no longer the case. We teach kids that informational texts provide information, but that just like in fictional texts, informational authors come with their own bias and perspectives that are embedded in their text. So we teach kids to read around the text. We teach them to read about the authors, asking who are they, what's their area of expertise, does anything in their bio suggest any agendas. We teach them to read for sources. Where did the author get their information? Do the sources seem to represent any particular groups or coalitions? We teach them to read other perspectives and to seek out additional sources. Are there nuggets that appear in most sources or that suggest an underlying truth? And are there highly contested parts or versions? All that critical reading work that we engage in heavily as adults. We teach our students to read analytically, reading for reasoning. Does the author state an explicit opinion? Does the author try to lead their audience to an opinion? And does the author acknowledge other opinions? We teach them to read for evidence. In what ways does the author support an opinion or claim? Is the evidence convincing? We teach them to read for angle. What aspect of a big topic is the author spending most of their time on? What do they not mention or spend very little time on? We teach them to read for craft and structure, word choice, writerly techniques and structure. And finally, we teach them to read for representation and perspective. Who is this piece written for? Whose voice is heard? And whose voice is silenced? All in service of taking informed action through writing and speaking. And you'll see all of those skills outlined in our ELA program philosophy and also in our social studies program philosophy. Okay.
Fine.
Along here are some of the things that our professional learning has enriched our instructional practice with. We're going to demystify some of them. I'm going to take you through a 5th grade activity today. So we've been working with some identity work and really looking within and webbing our identity so that we can use that as a lens for fiction we are reading as well as informational text that we are reading. Asking what in my identity offers a bridge to deeper understanding of this author's perspective and what serves as a barrier to a deeper understanding. One of the tools that we have used is the Courageous Conversations Compass. I know that every meeting I've attended in Michael's work has used that Courageous Conversations Compass. This is really a tool for self-reflection to kind of monitor where you are in the conversation. Are you in your head? Are you thinking through your belief system? Are you thinking from an emotional place, or are you trying to take action? And in these conversations, we try to stay centered so that we can not only understand where we are in the conversation, but also the perspectives of others in the conversation. I think that's about it there. Don't change it though yet, Chuck. I want to tell you where this learning, oh, go ahead.
This is all done, these are faculty activities or faculty.
This is some of the new learning that we have learned through our TC Equity and Inclusion Institutes as well as other professional development provided by CREC and others. So these are some instructional shifts and some instructional tools in our toolkit for facilitating these conversations, both with adults and with our younger learners. So I wanted to show you where the learning lives. It says curricular revisions on there, but not all of them are revisions. Our 3rd grade example is a writing unit in which our 3rd graders, it's called Changing the World, which I just love the title of that unit. And its subtitle is Persuasive Petitions, Speeches, and Essays. And it's an opportunity for a 3rd grader not to change the world, but to change a piece of their world. So they look around their space and they ask, what's beautiful here? And where are some places for improvement? This unit usually pummels Dr. Falcone with a lot of letters and conversations with our third graders around ways to improve our recess experience or ways to improve our hallway flow, or we've got garbage where we shouldn't have garbage, kindness rocks, those types of things. In fourth grade, we have infused our investigating character and historical fiction units with power and perspective lessons to use those as lenses for close reading, to approach texts, to understand both that historical thinking piece as well as that civic-minded piece as they're reading historical fiction texts, and to better understand characters. In grade 5, they take that investigating power and perspective to a bit of a deeper level, and they have a unit that will be new next year around investigating power and perspective. 6th grade has an essential research skills for teens, and that unit is about ethical research. Grade 7 has a whole class novel unit that focuses on Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred Taylor. They spend about 3 weeks in that shared text before turning to book clubs where they more independently apply the strategies that they were taught. And finally, grade 8 is considering an unlocking contemporary fiction unit for this coming year, and that unit is about literary advocacy. How are we doing? Okay?
You're a wealth of information.
No one's ever put it that way before, Jen.
I mean that in a totally positive way. We just really are. Every time we have the teaching and learning committee meetings, I go out like, oh my gosh. Are you at all comfortable posting all of your info?
Absolutely, and actually, none of this is secret. We have all of our course outlines already published online. I'm in the process of updating them for the coming year, and I was going to mention this at a later slide. I'm going to put a pin in it, and I will mention it on a later slide, but if I don't mention course outlines again, just nudge me.
Okay.
And I think just I'll double down on that, because that's something that we talked about at the end of last year, was helping some of our parents better understand
Yes.
what the content is, what the course sequence is, so on and so forth. And so that's something Karen had committed to at that time, and already has plans in process to, I think, host some parent evenings, as well as letters that go out before particular units.
Totally stepping on my later slide. But yes. Everything he mentioned, if I don't mention it, nudge.
Does that include a bibliography of all the books that are used in the curriculum?
The books that are used in the curriculum are not assured across the grade level. For example, grade 6 essential research skills for teens. Last year, that IET, our instructional effectiveness team, decided to have an equity focus for their curated texts, which had some implications for later independent inquiry, which we'll talk about. But the classroom teacher is certainly happy to let you know what will be, what texts will be used. And I'll talk more about that on that partnership slide.
Yeah, because I think it's critical for our parents to know in detail, here are the books that your children will be reading. Here's what we're reading now.
The classroom teacher is the best source for that information.
They need then to be diligent about getting that information out to parents. So there's nothing hidden. So since that, as you look at the news, you read, I won't go there. But the more open we can be, and the more detail we can provide about what we're teaching your children in the classroom, here are the books we're using as a curriculum, the better off we're all going to be.
We agree.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I have a plan in place for that I'll discuss on that later slide.
I mean, the story recently about the woman who had to sue to get the curriculum from the school system, what we were teaching, and they sued her. I mean, it's crazy. We're not there.
No, we're
God.
not there.
Okay, please.
I'm happy to. I want you involved in what your children are learning 100%.
Absolutely, and I hope our parents appreciate that and understand that. That's something. Okay, good.
All right, Chuck, I'm ready for the next slide. Oh, not the one I thought it was. All right. This particular slide is designed to show you the developmental progression of some of the social justice standards. I have a handout for you that has the anchor standards along in those domains. There are 4 domains to the social justice standards. The first is identity, the second is diversity, the third is justice, and the fourth is action. And there is a K2 sequence for those 4 domains. There's a 3-5 sequence, and there's a 6-8 sequence.
And you said those are the social justice domains? Is
They
that-
are,
okay.
and what I'm sending around the table now are the anchor standards. Dr. Chuck Smith mentioned earlier that we start with the end in mind. This is the high school graduate expectations. So by the time they leave us, this is where we would expect them to be. But I want you to see how they developmentally progress from kindergarten through 8th grade. So if you look at the first row, those are identity standards. In kindergarten, I know and like who I am, and I can talk about my family and myself and name some of my group identities. By 3rd through 5th grade, I know that all of my group identities are part of who I am, but none of them fully describes me, and this is true for other people too. We're going to do an activity with that one geared toward 5th grade students in a couple minutes.
Can we share?
Yeah, that's fine, as long as they last. And finally, by middle school, I know that overlapping identities combine to make me who I am, and that none of my group identities can on their own fully define me or any other person. So I wanted to kind of take you through an identity mapping activity that we would use. This one is designed specifically for the read aloud that we're going to use, the 5th grade read aloud that we're going to use in a few minutes. Feel free to follow along with me, or you can simply watch me demo. Doesn't matter. I have designed the prompts for this based on what this text is going to ask our 5th graders to do. And I've also considered that this is the beginning of the school year, and we're just now getting to know each other. This is something that will grow and expand throughout the year, and that we will revisit many times as we use it as a lens to look at texts. So for today's read aloud, ahead of today's read aloud, I might just ask them to consider who they are in their family. I'm the firstborn. I'm the firstborn daughter. I have a sister. Often wished I was an only. As I demo this for you, I'm going to demo this as my 10-year-old self because I don't need to complicate my students' 10-year-old minds with my adult perspectives. I might ask them, is there anything on there that you haven't thought about your family that you'd like us to know? And I'm going to share that I grew up a Navy kid, and I grew up very near a naval air station. And that's important for many reasons, but I think the most important being that my dad wasn't home all the time because service was very important to my father, and he was away for probably half of my childhood. So for the other half of the time, I had a very strong, independent mother who led our family. I then ask them, are there any groups to which you belong? What groups do you belong to? Perpetually a 5th grader. Girl Scout. And my friendships are very important to me. I'm going to put friend there. As kids are starting to write groups that they belong to down, it's not necessary for this one, but as I notice that kids are starting to, it's 5th grade. So by 5th grade, they're at the higher end of our 3-5 band, and some may be starting to write religion and other cultural groups down. They may start to be including their race. And if I notice that they're doing that, I may say, I'm noticing that some of you are including your race. I think I'm going to add that to mine. Or I notice that some of you are including your religion. That's so brave. I think I might add that to mine as well. I'd probably also share that I was a bookworm even at 10, and the library was my people. So then I'd push them to think about who is it that they admire and why. And on my list of people that I admire is my father. As I said, my father dedicated his life to service. He was in the military for 23 years. And then when he changed careers, when I was 15, he became a minister. So service was very important. Mrs. Duff was my 5th grade teacher, and she is I knew I liked to play school, but it was Mrs. Duff that inspired me to become a teacher because of how relatable she was with her class. And finally, Mrs. Day, who was my Sunday school teacher. And then is there anything else you want me to know about you? Bit of an overachiever and a people pleaser. Next slide. So as we take a look at this text, we're going to do a close read of this text. Close reading is rereading. We do this over multiple days. It's really hard to convince a 10-year-old that I've read it once, why do I have to read it again? And to really squeeze some more meaning out of it. So I'll take you through the first read, and then I'll describe for you what subsequent reads would be like. Sound okay? The first read is going to focus on that Identity 3.5 standard, Identity 3. I know that all my group identities are part of who I am, but that none of them fully describes me, and that this is true for other people. And you'll see why I did not probe them to name race, but I accepted it as it came up naturally. This particular book is by Ibtihaj Muhammad. Ibtihaj Muhammad, if you don't know her, was the first Muslim American Olympic athlete in the sport of fencing to wear a hijab as she competed. It was the first Muslim American woman to medal in the Olympics. She earned a bronze. She is also an activist, a writer, and an entrepreneur. She wrote a memoir called Pride, which inspired the first hijabi Barbie. So as we go through this text, I'm going to be asking you to think about your identity map. And I'm going to pause you at certain places to ask, is this a window moment for you, or is this more of a mirror moment for you? Sorry, Michael. Mama holds out the pink. Mama loves pink. But Assia shakes her head. I know why. Behind the counter is the brightest blue, the color of the ocean. If you squint your eyes and pretend there's no line between the water and the sky. It's the first day hijab. Assia knows it. I know it. We're sisters. The next day I wait. A new backpack, new light-up shoes. I feel special. I feel like twirling. Assia comes out of the house and I stop. It's the most beautiful first day of school ever. Is this a window moment for you or a mirror moment for you? When you have an idea, let me see your thumb. Thumbs down. Let me see your thumb if it's a mirror. First day of schools are great, aren't they? All those new school supplies. I love her light up shoes. Let me see your thumb if it's a window. What's a window for you, Dr. Smith?
Hijab.
Yeah, she's got her first day hijab on. I'm walking with a princess, so I pretend I'm one too. But even princesses have to stop to cross the street. Assia takes my hand in hers, says, "Come on, Faiza." We speed walk it. 14 steps, 14 light-ups to get across. Assia takes me to my line first, hugs me goodbye. I turn to watch her leave, give a little curtsy to the princess going to the 6th grade area. She's easy to see. Her hijab smiles at me the whole way. My first day hijab is going to be blue too. "What's that on your sister's head?" the girl in front of me whispers. "A scarf," I whisper back. I don't know why a whisper came out. I try again louder now. "A scarf, hijab." "Oh," she whispers. As you think about this as a window moment or a mirror moment, I want you to kind of push yourself to think beyond the hijab. Is there anything in your identity that you've downplayed before or whispered? You don't have to share it, but if you can just think about it and hold it in your mind. If you're feeling really brave, you can add it to your web, but I won't ask you about it. You can just hold it in your mind. Asia's hijab isn't a whisper. Asia's hijab is like the sky on a sunny day. The sky isn't a whisper. It's always there, special and regular. Are you thinking about that part of your identity that maybe you keep quiet? Is it special and regular? The first day of wearing hijab is important, Mama had said. It means being strong. I turn, but I can't see the blue anymore. I run to the big kid's side. 27 steps to see Asia. I need to give her another hug. I need to see her smile. Faiza? Asia's eyes wonder why I'm here. Are you excited, I ask, about the first day of hijab? She nods, smiling big, and I feel better. Someone laughs from nearby, a boy pointing at Asia. Why? You looking at their faces? Who are you relating to? Embarrassed for your sister? Surprised? A little outraged? Asia's hijab isn't a laugh. Asia's hijab is like the ocean waving to the sky. It's always there, strong and friendly. Some people won't understand your hijab, Mama had said, but if you understand who you are, one day they will too. In class, I draw a picture. 2 princesses in hijab having a picnic on an island where the ocean meets the sky. The girl who whispered in line says she likes it. She says it so loud, the teacher comes over to see it. I wonder if Asia drew a picture too. Recess time is for 5 cartwheels in a row. I land the last one near the 6th graders, near Asia and her friends, near a boy yelling, "I'm gonna pull that tablecloth off your head." I wonder how Faiza will react. Will she stand up to them? Will she just stand by? Will she do something else? Asia's hijab isn't a tablecloth. Asia's hijab is blue, only blue. Asia turns away. Her friends turn away. They race to the middle of the schoolyard, their shoes pounding the pavement, playing tag. Mama, don't carry around the hurtful words that others say. Drop them. They're not yours to keep. They belong only to those who said them. It takes me 48 steps to get away from the yelling boy. So we seem to have a different way of being there, just to let it go. After school, I look around. I look for whispers, laughs, and shouts, but I only see Asia waiting for me, like it's a regular day. She's smiling, strong. We cross the road hand in hand. I can't wait to get home, to show Mama the picture I drew, to show Asia that I'm wearing the same hijab in it. Because Asia's hijab is like the ocean and the sky, no line between them, saying hello with a loud wave, saying I'll always be here like sisters, like me and Asia. So we'd follow that read aloud, probably with a turn and talk about family and relationships, about what we have similar, as well as what we have that's different. And then on subsequent reads, once we had exhausted the identity piece, I might share with them the part of my identity that I keep kind of on the down low there. I'm not going to share it with you any more than I'm going to share my age with you today, but I would definitely share it with my class. But later on, we've looked at this through the lens of identity. Later in the week, we might analyze the language, the images, the details that were included and omitted, why the illustrator chose to leave the boys harassing Assia as silhouettes rather than have details there, why the author, that's a later one, I'm going to hold on to that. The words and phrases used, we might look at all of Mama's quotes and talk about how that helps make Assia and Fiza strong. On the second read, the third read actually, a little while later, we might examine where our mirrors occurred in the story. A lot of 5th grade girls can relate to that very first scene of shopping with Mama and sister, getting ready for back to school. Many can remember their first pair of light-up shoes and getting ready for the first day of school, particularly since we're reading it the first week of school. And we might wonder why the author chose to have those relatable moments so early on in the text. On a fourth read, we would examine the author's notes, looking for expertise, looking for prejudice against or favoritism for, and we might look to describe how a narrator or speaker's point of view influences how the events are described. Why the author made the choice to have Assia's story told from Fiza's perspective as a 3rd grader. And as you read the bios note, you hear that the inspiration for this story came from her own life watching her own sister on her first hijab day. So those subsequent 3 reads are aligned to the literacy standards. Each of those is. So we're immersed in doing the literary work at that point. Sir.
Why you don't talk at all about Islam, about the religion? How old do you have to be to have it? Why do you get a hijab at a certain point in time? How old are you when you get that?
So there are, with every book, I could teach so many things, and I have to make choices as a teacher. And today, my focus was on the identity standard 3 and those 3 literary over the course of that week.
Yeah, but okay. I mean, I just have to think those are critical questions. I mean, why is this her first hijab? How is she? Is she when you turn 13? Do you get it? I mean, okay.
In 5th grade, those questions are going to come up in my meeting area, and they're going to ask those questions, and we're going to have those organically. They're just not my instructional focus.
Okay.
Thank you. Excellent. So this is the partnership slide that I'd mentioned before. To Glenn's point, you're going to have to remind me of what yours were, Jen, but just bear with me.
Oh, yeah.
To Glenn's point about communication, I've been thinking a lot about how we can better keep parents in the loop as true partners. We take our roles as facilitators of learning very, very seriously, but we can't be there all the time. And as kids mature and grow and age, their independent inquiry beyond what we explore in the classroom will take them deeper into topics that they're going to need more trusted adults for at home. I have begun writing beginning of the year letters explaining our approach to dialing up student voice and choice, both in independent reading, in writing topics, and in research and inquiry topics. The teacher is always guiding what is read in class, but again, as kids move into more independence and transfer, they may, in their research, find things that as a family you're going to want to talk about. So these are invitation letters to the course outlines and the unit outcomes for every unit in that grade level, as well as an invitation to please talk to your child about what they are reading, what they're writing, what they're researching. I know that as they get to middle school, my 13-year-old says nothing, but we have to probe a little bit deeper and have those conversations. So to Dr. Smith's point, I am planning a couple of parent workshops over the course, evening workshops over the course of the year to talk about how to have those conversations with kids.
So if we're going to talk about voice and choice, are we providing our children with an array of choices and then they get to pick something that they'd like to tackle?
Typically through middle school, we start with a curated text set that is based on topics. Though ahead of those units, I'll send another letter that explains what choices are there. That one will come from the teacher because the teacher has some discretion there based on the kids in their room to make those choices. And that's where Glenn's question about text titles comes into. We typically curate a lot of informational texts on Padlets. Those can be shared in advance, but we'd invite you ahead of the unit to help guide your student, your child, our student in their choices.
Okay. So I guess like one of my biggest questions is, this story is great and it's a different perspective than many of our kids have. And I'm just wondering, how do we make sure that we present something on every different race and every different culture and every, like, how do we truly expose our kids to everything as opposed to only exposing them to some things, or having the majority of the population feel like there's not something that they can relate to because we're focused on so many things that they're not accustomed to and are different.
And that's why my office doesn't name the texts that are being used in the classroom, because as a classroom teacher, I want to make sure that every kid in my room feels represented in what we read, as well as provide windows into other cultures.
That leads me to the question about the email that we got from a parent last year at Middlebrook, with her daughter coming home in tears because the books they're reading, they're not about her. And I don't know that we ever responded to her. I never saw a response that we sent to her. But it was a very well-written email from his parents at Middlebrook. I don't know what grade.
I think I spoke to that parent this summer. And I think the other piece, that we're talking about here, and certainly, parent can speak in more depth and detail, but across, many units over multiple years, our curriculum and the materials we curate, I think, are representative. And in fact, I would say, probably the majority of our curriculum materials for many years have really represented kind of Western European voice. And so in more recent years, we've turned a more critical eye to looking at our materials and ensuring that there is a portion of our the content we curate that is just genuinely diverse. And so I think in that particular moment, I think what the parent was echoing, we were at a moment in time where the Quilting Reads was really focusing on particular African American voices. I think there were a couple of other things that it was kind of a confluence of events that might have led that child to conclude that it felt like all we were doing was looking at minority perspectives.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily representative of the entire year.
Yeah, but it's something to be aware of. We need to be sensitive and aware of those situations, because there are kids, and that's why I'm saying it's so important to communicate to the parents ahead of time. Here's what we're doing in great detail. These are the next 6 books that we're going to read.
Sure.
Okay? And if you want to talk about them, let's do that. But it's that we need to keep our parents as informed as we possibly can about what it is we're doing in the classroom, so we eliminate those questions that the parents can work with the child. The child comes home upset, well, this is what we're doing, this is why I understand, boom, boom, and deal with that. But I mean, it was a well-written email. I was really troubled by it.
Well, Glenn, that's nothing new. Like, I had children go through Middlebrook and, come home and say, when am I going to, they might have not been getting much diversity in terms of race or ethnic representation, but every book had a male protagonist. It was all about boys coming of age.
Yeah.
And, to this day, they can still list it. So, I mean, and as a parent, my response was like, that sucks, what can we do?
That's society.
Yeah, exactly.
Get used to it.
But then, supplemented with, here's some books with strong girls.
Well,
But I'm also thinking about, like, Berkeley High School, this was 30 years ago. They were like, oh, God, there's one teacher only teaches women, talks about women. And then the reality was she didn't. She talked about women less than half the time. But because until they took her class, they never heard about women.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's the perspective, too. Like, all of a sudden, like, wow, I've never, read a book about an African-American child. and then, now I've read 2. I mean, it just kind of, we don't even, I think that's probably part of the journey for all of us, I mean, because when I was 12, I wouldn't have even thought like, oh, I just read another book about a boy. That just seemed normal. All the books I read were about boys. And I probably would have responded the same way if I also had to read a couple of books about girls, all I'm saying is, it's,
I think it's also it's important as we do partnership and share that the title of a text alone doesn't really kind of complete the picture without really identifying what the object or what the standard is that's going along with that text, or how or why it's being used, especially in some of the lower grades, so you get a more rounded picture about how the study might progress over the course of the year and not just in that one isolated incident. Because I know that I've been going through the curriculum online and kind of piecing together and looking at the standards, and so without kind of having a fuller understanding, I think that for me, I kind of get lost in the purpose or the idea or how it all fits together to come across to complete the standard or the piece.
What would help complete that picture for you in a course outline format? What is missing there that you would like to see?
So sometimes I think I see the standard that that it's meant to achieve, but I don't really see a clear picture of what an example of a project or a work might be that's used to achieve that. And so it makes it very abstract for me, not having an education background where I look at pedagogy and just kind of then put the pieces together myself. So it becomes a little bit too much jargon for me, and I don't quite understand how it works. Like this, you reading this and doing this was great. Like now I've seen the language, the technical language of the standard, and I've seen an example of a text and kind of see how it fits together in the classroom, and how their text can raise other questions, but you're tailoring the lesson to fit these 3 pieces. So that to me was extremely helpful.
So I'm hearing that if we were to have parent nights doing more activity-based work and looking at actual student work and how it aligns to the course outlines would be beneficial?
I personally, I don't want to speak for every parent, but as this parent, yes, I would find that helpful. And I think some other parents would find that as well. I think the other pieces are important too, but having that available or it would also help kind of make a better picture about what's going on.
It also helps the age-appropriate piece. So you have the standard, which I think is important because that's the why. Then the example, that's grade 5. That's not grade 3, and it's not grade 8. So I think it brings it alive so that, and I think one of the earlier slides, spoke to age-appropriate and just developmentally appropriate. I think some parents may be questioning, are we throwing too much too soon at kids in a way that's going to be over their heads and just confuse them. But, by giving either the titles, to Glenn's point, or an example of an assignment, you begin to say, oh, that's what it means for 3rd graders.
So the readability of this text is far below 5th grade. But the thinking work that we were doing in this text was 5th grade thinking work. A teacher may choose to use this text to explore family and family relationships at a lower level. So it's not the text or the title of the text. It's really the task reader considerations in alignment with the text. But I think that's a topic that we probably need to explore.
So that's kind of what I meant when you just kind of do a dump of these are all the texts without a kind of correlation or understanding about what the texts are being used to further in the classroom, then
why they were chosen.
yeah. then I think that helps kind of close some of the gaps or the questions about what's kind of happening within in the room.
Thank you.
I agree with you. I also think, going back to your point, it gets, and kind of what Laura was sharing as well, like, it gets kind of tricky in terms of we're a school district, right? And as far as and my true belief is that we should focus mainly on academics, and that teaching about cultural diversity and whatnot is important because that makes our kids well-rounded, but our focus should really be on the academic aspect of it, and we should just be introducing them to some of these things, and that the greater discussion, yes, you can have discussions at school, but some of it, kind of like you were saying, the partnership has to be done at home. Like, we get into some of these greater discussions that really, like, I might have a different perspective on what I want my kids to understand versus what their teacher wants them to understand. And so I think that's also where I kind of struggle with all of this. And then going back to the whole point of, hey, I don't, like, this past year, a lot of things seem slanted one way. And I think a lot of our kids felt that way. And I just want to make sure that when we're presenting information to them, even if it's a choice activity, that there's a wide choice, and that truly, and it maybe, and like you said, like, that's where it comes into a teacher. But I think also sometimes our teachers need a little support in maybe choosing what might be more appropriate for everybody.
Those IETs work very closely with their instructional coach and with me in planning. And yes, there were, I think, intention was looking for some thematic connection for kids in the instance you're speaking of. And there may have been some unintended consequences to that we are exploring in deciding to put together choices that were around equity exclusively. So they are reflecting on that. I do want to point out that 3/4 of the work that I mentioned within this book is academic and tied to the Common Core state standards. 25% of it was the identity work.
Okay. And maybe this is a question for a separate time, but I know in one of our teaching and learning meetings we were talking about, was it the social standards that we were talking about? And not that we're required as a district, it's not Common Core, it's kind of something separate that came in, and we were talking about, I think we were, and I tabled it at the time, but if we're getting back into the school year again, revisiting, like, what social standards are appropriate for what grade, right? Like, we were talking about some social standards that some of us felt like, well, maybe that was just, we were introducing it and the kids were just too young to truly understand. I think there was some list that you had.
It was the
Oh, is there a bit?
Social justice anchor standards.
Okay.
Again, this is the end of 12th grade expectation, and what you saw on that previous slide banded it by K2, 3-5, and 6-8, so that you can see that developmental progression. I did not walk through every single standard, but I did walk through some identity standards, some diversity standards, some justice, and some action.
So when do we talk about, like, specific topics per grade? Like, if I were going to, and not to go back onto this whole thing, because I was even talking about something different a second ago, but to go back to, like, the gender identity thing. Like, who decided that that should be introduced in 6th grade?
That is an example of the reading in class being around gender equity, where the independent inquiry then later led to some additional deeper concepts there that were more sensitive than what was handled in the classroom.
So do we, as a district, decide that in 6th grade that is a topic that we want our kids to talk about, or are you saying that it kind of came up in a different way?
In the way it came up in the instance that you're referring to is the teachers had a desire to link the work they were doing in that ethical research unit to the Wilton Reed's work, and to provide continuity there. So they decided that they would expand that concept of equity to include more perspectives and more voices. And it led to gender equity, food equity, ability equity.
So I think that gets to a piece where we need to be cognizant that our children are coming into the classroom having seen things, heard things, been around things that are probably beyond what we're doing in the classroom, and maybe even beyond what should be explored in the classroom with that particular age. So making sure that we have an understanding of what those ideas may be, and how then, if the book is being focused on A, and then there's independent thought that brings in kind of some topic that is tangentially related but not the focus of the class, that there are boundaries there. And maybe I'm speaking too cagey. Yeah. So I mean, even like with something like with gender identity, kids are exposed to the concepts and ideas of pronouns in the larger world around them. Some kids more, some kids less, depending on what technology resources they have at home or what they talk about at home. So I think that if a conversation is going to be had that may lead to there in a grade, that perhaps that is not where the conversation, as a district, we find that to be age appropriate or ready or necessary, that we kind of have some understanding of where we're going to be focused and where we're going to leave off, and how to handle that within a classroom setting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
No.
We are engaging in those conversations at the middle school level around sensitive topics and developmental appropriateness, and really holding up a mirror to our curriculum and deciding where's the line and where are we preparing them for future conversations academically.
And also, but I also don't want to leave our kids kind of out there without an anchor in terms of knowing where they could, if they have these questions, to be able to have appropriate resources, whether it's through their family or through a library or whatever that may be. But
We agree about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But age appropriateness is really difficult. Like, and I tell two stories.
Yeah.
Sorry, I tell all stories. One is my son being assigned. They were doing a wonderful program. It was A to Z, and he was Z, and he was a slave. And he came home and was like, "What's a slave?" And I was like, "Oh my God, how he's too young. How do I explain this to him? Like, what was the teacher thinking?" And I was complaining to one of my friends, and she said, "Laura, when do you think Jewish parents tell their kids about the Holocaust? And when do you think black families tell their children about racism? And here you are." And she didn't have to say anything more. I got it, and this was before, well, not quite. It was about the time white privilege was appearing in academia, but it was so much an example of that. And, there is always age appropriateness, like the proper language. And I was so grateful to Jessica for pointing that out to me, because then I could talk to Jason about that. And, I think of how that had an impact on him till today, 25 years later. But also, the gender identity issue is sensitive, because some parents are like, we don't want to talk about it, we don't want our kids to know there's a certain age. Well, let me tell you, kids who are questioning their gender identity have already done it by the time they're 11, and that's one of the issues. Is then again it comes to age appropriateness, and they feel isolated and marginalized. They don't have the language. Now, is school the best environment for that? Probably not. Like, I have to say, it's tough, right? But, and parents don't always have the ability or the language, and it's hard as to be a parent with this group of, with any child. But I think it's everyone's experience is so different, you know what I mean? And so we might disagree on what's the appropriate age, right, Chuck? You and I might, but again, like, part of it is perspective and experience, but it also comes down to the family and how the teacher's going to address it. I had our teacher at Sergeant Mill said, "Why can't Molly just put a bow in her hair and I'll stop calling her Matthew?" Like, you know, and to me, Molly was pretty, you know, like, was perfect, you know. And so, like, how do you deal with that and how the teachers, I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but I think it comes down to, like, who is determining what's appropriate? And is the final word the parent? And the parent should have more of a say, but also, like, how sensitive are the teachers being? And is it better not to say anything than to say something harmful? I don't know. I wrestle with this still.
One thing I think that ties it back together is the social emotional learning. You know, being that sensitive to our students, because when these questions come up, it is something that's on their minds, and we don't want to be insensitive to that. You know, we want to respect what they're saying. We want to respect what they're bringing to us, that they're being brave enough to share this in our group setting. And we also just want to be just mindful that, you know, there is a boundary, you know, there is that partnership, but also, you know, there's that understanding of you're the parent, we are the educator, and we're working together. And we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're not doing this on our own and completely going off of what we think is best. We're trying to address in the moment the question or the concern that's brought to us, but also we're trying to bring you into what's going on. We're trying to include you as much as we can. Now, we can't email you in the moment, but we certainly can reach out to you afterwards and say, hey, listen, you know, this is something that came up. Your children may come home. Your child may come home and question you about this, and that way we can keep this going, because really that partnership is the only way that we are going to help our children grow and really become, you know, again, we talk about become who we want them to be, these sensitive, kind, wonderful, educated adults who not only can perform well academically, but also can connect with others,
Right.
you know.
And I think to your point, sorry, go ahead. I think to your point, that's perfect. And the two of you are like a perfect marriage, right? If you go, I mean, not really, but you know what I mean. Like, if you go first and introduce to our parents, like, hey, this is what we're thinking, and a teacher follows up with, hey, this was the broad topic that Karen was talking about, and this is the way our conversation kind of ended up in class based on who we have in our class, like, that would be perfect. So when our kids come home and we're not like totally blindsided by some massive conversation, I mean, that would be wonderful.
And I think Ms. DeLuca, you said about perspective. I think these are perspective, you know, because remember, our children come home and they may, like my boys, may take that one word that was said and share that one thing in their minds of what it meant, again, based on the experiences they've had with me growing up in our culture, in our family, and completely just make it something that it's not.
Right.
And then it's my job to go, are you sure? Really?
And that's where
Tell me more.
Yeah, that's where I also think it's helpful knowing kind of where the text was used and what it was being used to achieve, or what the standard it was tied to it. Sorry, I'm fogging up. So that when your child comes home and kind of relates out of context to you what happened, you're able to say, to have like a step back and
And
be
to
able
reach
to
out to
say,
the educator as well.
and to understand kind of what maybe the larger framework was, the larger picture was, and then to see, well, I can, you know, see how it wound up going there, even though that wasn't the intent of the lesson, and work together within the, you know, with the teacher and the classroom, and also to have that trust to know that your teacher, you know, where it ended up was not where it was started or meant to go, and how we all, you know, work together to figure out boundaries.
I'm hearing that we have some work ahead at strengthening our partnership, and I'm more convinced than ever that these parent forums are the way to go about that. So I hope that you'll come and participate.
I think that all of this conversation, I have to think, really points to how difficult it is to be a teacher today. What a challenge it is to be a good teacher. You're a kid. I grew up, we had 3 TV stations, 3 channels when I was growing up, all the way through high school. We had a CBS channel, an ABC, and NBC, and that was it. They all signed off at midnight. Okay, there was no TV after midnight. Life was so much simpler then. So much simpler.
Was it really though?
It was.
Exactly. Was it really? Yes.
No, it was a lot simpler than it is today for kids, okay?
I would add parent to your list of complex tasks.
Well, no, it has become incredibly difficult, parenting and teaching. I mean, today, our kids are so bombarded with all the social media crap. I mean, there's no way to stop it. It's out there. You just cannot turn the clock back or pretend it doesn't exist because it's there. And it just makes your job as teachers and educators so damn hard.
But it also makes it more critical.
Well,
We
well,
have
yeah.
students who are now bombarded with information
Oh.
that can be biased.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our job is to kind of take control of that and build the
Yeah.
capacity of our students to,
Yeah.
I'm going to say, navigate that
Yeah.
information in a literate way.
Right. It's just so hard today to be a teacher, so much harder than
We're up to the challenge.
Oh, I'm sure. Hey, we are in Wilson, I think, pretty darn lucky that we've got the staff, the teachers we do. And I mean that. And occasionally, look, we're all going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to go off on a tangent, perhaps they shouldn't have, and get them, bring them back in. It is difficult today to be a teacher. And kids are learning things, hearing things that they're not socially mature enough to handle, to deal with, and the world is a complicated world today. We've got to recognize that and be sensitive to it. It makes our job harder to keep parents advised as to what's going on and what we're doing and what we're about. It's a harder job today, I think.
So I think, we have one more section to do here, and I have some folks in my school who have some information to share too. But, Jen, your question before about, what is the role of the board here? As this conversation has unfolded today, I think this is a big part of the role. We're facilitating opportunities, you're facilitating opportunities to have questions asked, to promote deeper understanding, to start to parse apart process around how we manage really complex issues. And I think that's, on that kind of communication side is, we're all working together, but certainly in your role as board members, as those questions are, presented to you, it's now here's how we're going to, respond to this as a system. Here are resources individually that you, parent, can turn to so you can get good, accurate, timely information. And again, I guess we need to continue, more opportunities like this and even widen the audience.
Yeah, I think the workshop's twofold. One is oversee the strategy and talk about, are these the standards we want, et cetera. And then how is it implemented, what's it look like in the classroom, so that when anybody asks us, we have a much better grasp of where to start talking and how to start talking and where to refer people. So we're communicators, and we also have to sort of guide the strategy. So today was trying to get it all out on the table and seeing where the district is, where our questions are, and then we'll follow it up. But in order to do that, we really got to get through today's agenda. So I hate to be such a taskmaster, but I want to give people who are prepped for this the opportunity.
We appreciate it. We have some friends from the high school who wanted to talk specifically about what they're doing.
I'm going to just try to pull them up here on the screen.
Just so they-
Hello, Hala
appreciate you
and
being
Molly and
there.
Lara.
Thank you.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Have you been able to hear the conversation so far? Terrific. I'm so glad.
Pretty well.
Good. Okay, so we're at a bit of a disadvantage here. I'm going to try to split the screens if that's okay. So that way we can see you and see our screen.
Can I help you with that? I'll show you the easy ways to do that.
Yeah, all right. You're the expert here. Oh, brilliant. Great. Okay. Great. And then, I'll sit here and I'll just advance the slides.
Okay.
Yeah, so go ahead, Jen.
All right, so
We're having a little bit of a hard time seeing what's on the screen, but I think we're supposed to be on the slide. Is that right? And we're starting with a slide about the question of what Wilson High School is doing with the curriculum.
Yeah. But
Is that what we are?
Yes.
Yes, Hala.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Hala Harani. I'm a teacher in the English department at the high school. And this conversation has really been quite fascinating and interesting because I think a lot of the questions and discussions pretty much transcend age or school, many of these questions that, we still kind of struggle with at the high school level, and I guess a great way to start is to say that we'll start with all of the foundations and the skills that and the questions that Karen brought up. Is pretty much a foundation of where we are as well, but we're just going to take it a step further and talk about, on the high school model, what does that look like? And, the question is how we continue to develop these in order to include the themes of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so if we've got these particular goals in mind, which are about, raising awareness, developing that awareness, which hopefully will lead to understanding through empathy. That's really difficult because it's a kind of a soft sort of skill, and also the representation in the classroom. Well, as we know, at the high school level, we're dealing with a wide variety of courses. There's student selection of courses as well. Many of the courses are thematic in nature, and the program of studies outlines those pretty clearly. And I think there was a huge question around the texts, specific texts that are used in particular courses. That also is outlined in the program of studies. So hopefully both students and parents who are taking a look at course descriptions will be able to focus in on what texts are being used. So just to kind of start, I'm going to just give an overview maybe of, we can go to the next slide, of what exactly we're looking at and what the focus is in terms of including this diversity equity in our curriculum. And really, we're going to start with the ideas of perspective and identity. That I think mentioned the idea of having read a lot of non-Western, texts in the past. We're really looking to broaden those perspectives. How do we expose? So the idea is exposure and analysis, and where the high school differentiates is that we do get into the analysis at a much deeper level. So Karen mentioned close reading. We're doing a lot of close reading because not only now are we looking at the various perspectives, but we're also looking at how language influences expression. So in other words, if I have a particular identity or I'm coming from a particular segment of the population, how is my language, the way that I express myself, how do I communicate those experiences? And we're taking academically a very close look at that. And that translates not only into close reading, but also into what are we doing with that analysis? How do we then use that or apply that? And that's something that Laura is going to get into a little bit later. So what are we doing? We're looking at broadening perspectives first and foremost, and that is looking at non-Western texts, looking at texts that deal with some of those marginalized or minority populations. We're looking at defining what does the other mean? Who are these marginalized people? And in what way does an author's experience, what way does that author's position in society allow them or prompt them to communicate in a particular kind of way? And then another thing is that there is no one particular narrative. That in a given time period, in a given experience historically, that there are many different narratives that we can read and many different perspectives that we can kind of synthesize. And so that's one of the words, right? It's not just reading one perspective and analyzing it, but taking all of those into account, comparing, contrasting them, synthesizing them, drawing conclusions, looking at the language. How do people communicate to us? How is bias communicated? And really with that, we know that our students are consumers of information. They are, whether it's social media or news reports or whatever they're reading, they are consumers of information, and being able to analyze and critically think about the information with which they are presented is going to be a life skill for them. And we're trying to expose them to that. So the exposure and the analysis sort of go hand in hand. I'm an English teacher, and Lara and Molly are both social studies teachers, and of course, we've got a wide variety of courses within those disciplines. But as an English teacher, I can say that, we, again, use this idea of communicating and also not just fiction, nonfiction, these perspectives. So there was another question that had come up earlier about, do we deal, for example, something comes up about the Muslim culture. What do we do? How are they going to be aware of it? Well, these give us the opportunity to bring in, even in an English class where we're dealing with maybe more fiction or novels or plays or poetry, allows us to bring in a lot of nonfiction texts as well, so that we have an idea or a basis with which to evaluate some of this material. So it's all about informing, it's about analyzing, it's about looking deeply into the language and processing that. So along with these varied perspectives, we're also taking a look at identity and how is that developed. And Karen talked about how that starts very early on, and the idea is a continuum and just getting a little bit more precise and more analytical as we go on. And once again, identity influences expression, influences language, and influences ways of communicating, and how do these particular authors communicate their own experiences through language. So I'll move on to Lara, and she'll talk a little bit about how that translates into application or engagement.
Hi, I'm Lara Fig. Nice to see you guys from afar. Just wanted to make sure, is everybody looking at the slide titled Engagement, Application, and Creation?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So just as Hala had mentioned, those are a lot of skills and emphasis that we want the students to continue to work on in school, at the high school. So another piece of that is then applying those skills, those identities, those perspectives into real world scenarios that include authentic audiences. And then be able to empathize with those individuals. So project-based assessments are, I would say, pretty, are done in many classes. So that really ties in those real-world scenarios, those audiences, and then allows students to use varying perspectives to identify issues or problems in the real world and then try to find solutions. Definitely in the social studies department, that is a big emphasis in many of our classes. We also, through the process of reading research presentations, we want to make connections between the past and present, that things are not isolated in the past and are not isolated in the present, but help them to find that continuity by exploring a variety of resources and perspectives. And because we want the students to make those connections and be able to express what they've learned authentically to themselves, we also we had asked the staff to kind of give us some insight on different kinds of projects they've been working on. And you can see in the third point all the ways that teachers said that they've had their classes explore and be able to express what they've learned, such as TED Talks, essays, graphic arts, paintings, etc. So, it's really allowing students to connect in the best way that's meaningful to them. And then another important part that we are emphasizing in the high school is how to practice and engage in civil discourse. It's so important to be able to have these discussions about controversial issues in a structured environment in the classroom, where students learn the skills, how to ask questions, how to listen and represent their own perspectives. And we, also hope that can be applied outside the classroom as well. And Molly? Okay.
Hey, hi everyone. So we're going to kind of tie things up on this last slide for us that says looking forward. So I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the things that we've discussed, some plans and goals for moving forward with this work at the high school. So a few things, spending more time making additions and revisions to curriculum in all subjects with these issues in mind, particularly incorporating diverse topics, voices, and perspectives. Working with schools throughout the districts to streamline curriculum and establish some kind of common language, as the students are kind of moving through their school careers. Working across the disciplines within the high school and across the different departments to collaborate and work towards our shared goals. Continuing professional development to raise the faculty's awareness of their own social positions and increase their comfort with these types of discussions. And then finally, looking forward, we're going to be working to develop and implement the state-mandated Black and Latino Studies course that is a full-year elective that all Connecticut social studies departments are going to be offering in the 2022-2023 school year. So those are some of the things that we're looking at moving forward at the high school. That might be our big update here.
Thanks, Molly.
Yep.
And then questions for Hala, Molly, or Lara?
I just think similar, not really a question, but just a point, similar how we had some examples or kind of about how the text might interact with a project or an end goal within the classroom. I think that also would be useful on the high school level as well when I was looking through some of the syllabuses and the course outlines to be able to see an example or an idea of what an actual project may be in connection with a specific text or unit of study in the social studies curriculum along those lines. Not for every single one, but just kind of have a little bit of a clearer understanding of how the standard and the syllabus and the project all work together.
Sure. And again, I guess the only comment I had was the text at grade level. What other, I guess the going back here, what non-Western text are you using? And is it at each grade level is this applicable? Is it only the senior year that this is being done, or?
So I think it's course dependent. So Hala and Molly and Lara, did you guys hear that question from Glenn?
Yes, they are course dependent, and that's why I was saying that in the program studies, the texts that are to be used in the courses are actually identified in each of the classes. So that's a little bit different on the high school level because it is course by course.
Where would I find what those texts are?
In the course outlines, right? They would be included in the course outlines that you guys
The actual
publish?
text?
It's the program studies.
Okay. So I can go there and.
Well, the courses are the text aren't necessarily listed in the program studies. They would be.
Sometimes
they
they are.
give representative text titles in the
Okay.
program of studies.
Okay.
Yeah, so those have been two sources.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
I just add one comment, building on Jen's point, the academic piece. I know that what's embedded here is critical thinking. I'm assuming it is, but I just wonder if in some of your descriptions you could highlight that better. In terms of critical thinking, the analysis, synthesis, all that sort of stuff. I think it's implied, but you didn't state it directly, so I think that would be helpful that there's the rigorous academic high school work that, when you start analyzing different perspectives, it's more than superficial. It's, it's pretty comprehensive, it's pretty challenging, that when you get to
Right, and
discussion.
once again, it aligns with the standards, so all of those standards related, well, in my discipline, to literature, obviously, that all of those standards are incorporated regardless of what it is that we're
Right. Yeah.
I think we could.
It just needs to, I would just suggest it would just be highlighted a little bit more. Again, it's implied, all of that, I get it. but some of the more rigorous stuff that goes on in the high school needs to come through.
Great. Anything else for our three high school colleagues here?
No, I'm looking at the time, and I want to thank you for taking time out of what must be a crazy few days before school starts. So thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it. All right, we'll see you soon. Great. And then the last piece.
Tomorrow.
here,
See you tomorrow.
Yes, we're going to move on to how we address diversity, equity, and inclusion through our policies and practices. And I'm going to turn this over to Michael to talk a little bit about our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
I want to first start by saying thank you for being here to have this conversation as a board. It's not easy, and we know you've probably heard lots of things throughout the past year and a half related to diversity, equity, and inclusion from parent perspective, student perspective, and it's great that you're here now so that we can all be on the same page, so to speak, and we can just, again, have a better understanding and to continue to move forward. I want to draw us back to, as we look at this mission statement, some things that were said earlier, specifically multiple perspectives. When we began this work, which was the summer of 2020, after the work coming out of Teachers College in 2019, multiple perspectives, meaning parents, community leaders, students, staff, administrators, we all came together to begin to discuss equity, inclusion, diversity in Wilton. And we said, what are our challenges and what do we want to come of this? We didn't isolate ourselves just as staff and administrators. We included everyone. And thankfully, I mean, if you remember what the summer of 2020 was like, we had quite a number of folks who represented every walk of life here in Wilton. And at one point, we actually, I think, crashed Zoom to where we couldn't fit any more people in. And we had to extend our license to allow more people. So during that trying time, when we were just coming out of our quarantine, it was really telling that so many people from the community decided to volunteer and come on board and have this conversation about what should our mission be. And that's what you see before you, coming out of those discussions and continuing to what we have in front of us. And I just want to draw your attention to a few things in there. First of all, just out of the conversation, it was a resounding, first of all, we want to make sure everyone feels heard. We want to make sure everyone feels like respected and understand that we're trying to do the best that we can to be sensitive to what's happening in the world around us, to what's happening in Wilton, to what's happening just in the lives of the children in our care. So as the mission statement says, and I'm not going to read it to you, I just want to point out some things, that to respect them as individuals, you know, in alignment with our social emotional goals. We want to make sure that the students understand that we recognize their individuality, as well as that we respect their cultural background, we respect their choices as it relates to, I mean, you remember what it was like to be a middle schooler, trying to identify and establish your identity, you know, to be different, but at the same time to be the same as everyone else. You know, how can we support that and help others be supportive as well, meaning peers and the adults in their lives? So our district students must be honored, and it was nice that the group put the word must. It was emphatic that they must be honored and valued in every classroom. It's not an option. And we want to make sure that we support their social, emotional, and cultural needs. And, you know, as it reads there, you know, just some ways that this can be achieved. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but just point out that it's through the practices that we implement every day that have the impact. I'm sure we all recognize that, we understand that. And especially those that have to do with understanding what we believe, how those beliefs influence how we interact with each other, and how we can begin to understand each other better. So without reading the whole thing to you, that's the mission statement in a nutshell. I'll give you a moment, if you haven't already read it, to take a moment to look at it and read it for your own digestion.
This is a voluntary faculty committee.
The committee is a voluntary faculty committee, but where this mission statement took, at the inception, was from some of our civic leaders, some of our organizational leaders, like A Better Chance of Wilton, our staff, our faculty, parents in the community, students, and these were regular summer occurrences. Like once a month, we met on Zoom to discuss, okay, what do we want? What is the desire when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion for Wilton to make progress, to come forward and to show that we are listening and we are trying to make things better for anyone who might be feeling marginalized or might be feeling ignored or left out.
Yeah, no, I just wanted a sense of how big the group was. Is it teachers only? Is it K-12? Is it community people?
The official committee is only staff throughout the district. But through our summer sessions, it was over 50 on our first one, and then we got up to somewhere near 100 on one of them. So that's where that comes from. Okay.
Micah, what did you all see as being the district's primary challenge?
The primary challenge when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. One of the biggest challenges is, again, this understanding that our beliefs affect how we interact with each other. Okay. And that's the primary challenge, because we don't ever want to approach to say that someone's belief system is wrong, because it is what it is. Right. But how can we now start to understand, again, going back to the Courageous Conversations Compass, how do we understand where you're coming from? What are your beliefs and where your perspective comes from? And hopefully now you can understand where mine comes from, and then we find our way to recenter ourselves, so that way when you're speaking, I can hear you based on your beliefs and where you come from. And then we move forward together. And someone said trust earlier. That's where trust begins. The fact that I'm willing to listen to you, and not just listen, but to understand where you're coming from, and you're willing to do the same with me, whether we agree or not. Yep. But just that willingness gets us that much closer to trust, and as we trust each other more, then we can now make strides and begin to make this work a reality.
And did you, kind of to your point, right, your view might be different than mine, but neither of us are wrong, it's just different. I guess in terms of our teachers and teaching our kids, who kind of monitors that, and is there anybody that kind of watches out for that and makes sure that our teachers are presenting both sides to every story, and that it's not slanted one way?
Yes, we have a district committee, and in each building, we also have a building committee that has representatives as part of the district committee. Okay. And we regularly invite, again, parents to be part of the discussion, because, again, we don't want to leave that part of the partnership out, and it's critical that we're all in this together.
Okay.
Okay. All right, next one. Okay. So some of the work we've been doing with our staff, as you can see, after coming off the heels of attending Teachers College, we began our summer book study of White Fragility. Again, we presented this to our staff members on a volunteer basis, so no one was compelled. We had an overwhelming response. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and I'm very pleased to say we had 3 sessions going on during the summer with 3 different sets of facilitators from different grade levels of White Fragility. And again, this is after the wonderful work that Dr. Smith did with the district leadership team of this book study on White Fragility. So that's where we began. We also had our district professional learning sessions with facilitators from the Capital Regional Educational Council, correct? And they walked us throughout last year, looking at cultural competency in the classroom, the power of words, expanding our cultural knowledge individually and as a district, as well as the power of our actions, widening our cultural lens. We also had the wonderful fortune to be included and take part in what's called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace certificate program. It was hosted by University of South Florida, Loma College of Business, and this was free. And they had over 5,000 participants worldwide. And a number of our faculty did take part in that and received their certificate. And it was weekly, and you had to sign in. It was a few hours each night. You had to go through the quizzes at the end, and they weren't simple yes, no, A, B, multiple guess type. They were thought-provoking, and you really needed to go back and revisit the transcripts, revisit the videos to digest the information and synthesize it into, to pass the quiz, so that at the end you can receive your certification and your badge from there. And also attendance at the Developmental Systemic Racism Conference offered by CERT in May of 2021. We're pleased that we did have 16 staff and 10 students from Wilton High School. Now the staff is representative from each building. It was not just high school, middle school. It was members from the committee at every level. So that way, again, we make sure that all ages are involved and we're all getting the same information at the same time. Debbie?
And just explain what CERT is, please.
That is
Education Resource Center.
So they're an agency that provides professional development and technical support to school districts across the state. So
Right.
similar to
correct.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's connected to the State Department of Education.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I'm sorry, CREC is,
Capital Region Education.
but it's connected also to the State Department?
Yeah, so
Okay.
there are, I forget, 4 or 5 across the state, and these are agencies designed to provide support to school districts. They're set up regionally.
In this area, we have what's known as CES, Cooperative Educational Services. CREC is the CES around Hartford.
Okay.
And also in line with our staff professional learning opportunities, we do have some opportunities for students as well. One of them being the Wilton High School Racial Equity and Diversity Club, which was formed by one of the students after some of the events that took place here, and he just felt the need. He says, we need to do something. We need to be involved as students. There are also the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Student Advisory Council, which was started last year to, again, guide our thinking as a leadership team from the student perspective of what's really happening in class, what's really happening outside of the class, as they're walking to the field, the practice fields, when they're, sitting at the diner, when they're just going about daily student life that's in between school and home. What's happening when there aren't any adults around, basically, and how do we address them? What are our students seeing? What are they experiencing? And how can we really help them navigate that? So that Student Advisory Council is really important. The Dismantling Systemic Racism Conference, which I mentioned as well, again, having high school students bringing that information back and also sitting with us and saying, all right, now that we attended this is the information we have, and these are some things we think will help us move further along. All right? And as I mentioned earlier, there are different committees at each building that tie into the larger district committee. So, continuing towards progress. We know it's a continuum. It's not a final destination. We are continuing towards progress. And one of them is cultivating relationships between Wilton students and students of color in surrounding districts. Thankfully, Wilton has been a pioneer since the late 60s, early 70s, back when Project Concern was here. I don't know who remembers that, but so that was a wonderful thing that I'm pleased my family and close friends were part of, being bused from Bridgeport to come to Wilton early in the morning and to experience not just the education here, but also now that my siblings and my friends are older, the relationships that they have with the Keenans and the Kellogg's and the different Wilton families who've been here for years. again, it builds that trust. It helps to cultivate that different understanding, not based on what we see in the media and in television and in the movies. It's reality. To where when, if I can get personal for me, when my brother, who played on the football team, couldn't, it came down to they canceled the program and he couldn't get back and forth to Wilton to play football, where the Keenans said to my mom, we'll take care of him. If it's okay with you, let him stay for the week and we'll send him home on the weekends. Just families to do something like that of a different background, especially during that time in America, speaks volumes to how much Wilton has continued to do. And then bring it closer to home where Wilton is here, and the support of the community, of the students of color who come in, to just try to understand, not to change anyone, but to understand the conditions that they're coming from, and that to think that our students get to experience that on a daily basis. Our students get to interact, not because they're told to, not because it's a curriculum piece, but because it's real life. That when they ride a train and they're having to see a person of color, they don't jump to a conclusion right away that's based on something that they saw on television or on social media, or maybe something they heard from another friend. Now they can rely on an experience that they've had with an actual human who sat in class with them, who they know gets hurt like them, has laughs like them, goes through the same struggles and worries of, is my hair right today? Unfortunately, we don't have a large student population of color in Wilton, but that's okay because there are surrounding communities that do, and I think there's a lot that we can, we can benefit from creating those relationships in other districts with other districts. Also, we're in what's called phase 1 right now, called RID, and that's again going back to those mirrors and windows. That we're in the mirror phase, reflecting on those beliefs and those things that our perceptions, right? Identifying those beliefs and perceptions, and then dismantling beliefs and perceptions that can perpetuate, the treatment of anyone. Okay, and we're moving into phase 2, so we're not completely done with we're not rid of phase 1. If I can make a corny joke there, we are moving from phase 1 to phase 2 to where we are now more about applying what we're doing here. And apply just simply, you don't have the access to the slide like I do, so I'm just going to get to there. So apply means we're in the point of either applauding or appreciating or addressing some of the systems that are in place. So when there's an issue that's centered around diversity, like when those letters show up, how do we address them? Or if there's something that was fantastic, we applaud those. So not to really just read everything on for you. So applying is really about cultivating a culture of change, and that's where we are right now. That's the phase we're in right now with this conversation. And to look forward as far as including the entire town, a series called We Are Brave. And as you know, this is an acronym, and it stands for, we have our welcoming exercises, and then we also have our anti-bias work, which is the A, our reflective work, our research, looking at research of trauma, and then also engaging and fostering authentic relationships with members of the community, because it's a challenge for families of color, and this is based on our conversations, to feel like they're accepted and not looked at as different based on their differences in their cultural backgrounds. And the Brave just simply means it's a celebration at the end of that we're bold in Wilton, we're responsive to what the information is brought to us, we're accountable for our actions and what we do. Of course, we're vibrant about trying to continue this work, and we're exertive. We want to make sure that we put our best foot forward and make sure we're always taking in the information and the feedback, so that we can continue to be sensitive to the needs of our students and our staff. All right.
Michael, any questions?
No, thank you.
Right, there are just some other things that we do here in Wilton. You were familiar with the Wilton Reads, and we originally wanted to have Fran here to talk a little bit more about that program, but I think we're all pretty familiar. I think she did the whole presentation of it. And she also wanted you to know about her efforts to diversify our collection. She has a whole way of actually measuring the diversity of our library collections, and she has set some goals around it, which we are increasing our diversity. That's great. And Kevin, you wanted to talk about that?
Also, just that I'm cognitive we're well over our time at this point, so just very briefly, in the effort to create a supportive and inclusive environment and program for all, we have a series of policies already on the books. You're well aware of them. We sent them to you this summer. The new policy that we drafted this summer is titled Equity and Diversity. The policy committee hasn't yet met this year, so this is in draft form. You've seen it already. We'll be meeting to review, discuss it, revise it as necessary, and then at some point at the start of this school year, we'll come forward for a board meeting, and we'll just talk through the goals of the policy and what we're hoping to accomplish with it. So, thank you.
Any final thoughts, lingering ideas?
I think we're in a good place. I really do. I think we have been in a good place. And the work we're talking about today is only going to make us better. I think all in all, I think we're very fortunate with them. Great staff, great system, great people in Wilton. I just don't get this. I mean, Wilton is a very unique community. There's a lot of positives about being here. Unlike perhaps one of our neighboring communities that fell apart the other night, we're very, very lucky in Wilton. And I think we owe a lot of it to our educational staff, to our school system here, and to our parents who raise great kids. So I think we're in a good place. We'll just keep getting better.
I think my only final comment would be just let's make sure we strike a balance, a true balance between what's too much, what's not enough, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
You mean in terms of time devoted, or?
Yeah. I think this is a time devoted. I think how many times does it come up in a child's day throughout their curriculum? I want our kids to we live in a bubble. I mean, we truly do. Wilton is a bubble, and that's fine. And I think we all want our kids to be exposed to all of these things. I think it's just truly trying to find that balance where they don't feel like they're being bombarded with so much diversity that suddenly now they start to feel like they're wrong, for lack of a better word. I think that's just what I want to make sure of, that there's nothing wrong with any of our kids. Like, we're just trying to expose them to some new things. And I think that sometimes when they get stuff coming at them from every direction and every subject, and I know I joked about this at our teaching and learning committee meeting, right? Like, somehow we had, diversity and equity and inclusion hit 4 different subjects in one day, but we can't get math to cross multiple subjects, right? Like, and that's where that's what I mean by striking a balance. Like, I just want to make sure that, all of our kids, feel comfortable in all ways.
I think that's right. That'll be the collective effort of all of us to
Right.
conversation with our kids and conversation with our teachers to pay attention to their experiences
Right.
and continue to do this. I think this is what we're trying to do.
So if we have time, if just Ruth and Laura, just Glenn said something, Jen said something, can you just weigh in just a little bit about either today or what you want next, or not? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just felt like it was turning into a round robin.
I'd forgotten that part of the Board of Ed where we had to go around and share our
I'm
thoughts.
sorry. Okay, we don't have to do
No.
much sharing. It's okay. We don't
No,
have
it's
to.
fine.
I just think that it's important that we recognize, like, that Wilton does have a bubble element to it, and that exposing our children to the greater world around them in a healthy and positive way, also then in service of rigorous educational components is positive. And I think the more we do it, the better they become and the better our future world becomes. So I'm glad that we're doing this work. It's, I think personally, equally as important as math standards and English standards. When I think of the world that, the classroom that my daughters will be sitting in as freshmen in college, and the multicultural environment that is the workplace, that more is better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm probably more cynical than most people, but I think our kid, I mean, you know, there's a lot they have to deal with. I think a lot of it can be addressed outside of school as well. But that, again, I think that's the balance we're also looking for, is like, it should never feel like a bombardment when you're addressing diversity. And even if all they do all day is talk about diversity, it should never feel a bombardment. And I feel stunned sometimes that it's 2021, and I feel like we've slid back from where we were when I started grad school in 1988 in regards to those things. And just, you know, keep working at it, and, you know, keep the communication open, and hoping that, you know, parents do go to your meetings and continue with, and thank you, Michael, for what you do. I mean, you know, when Kevin's like, well, Michael Gordon's like, Michael Gordon needs to do everything, for obvious reasons, you know, and, you know, that's just, you know, but we just have to keep going, because if we don't go forward and work on that, we'll just backslide more.
I just want to add our thanks to all the presenters and all the work that went into these slides, all the work that went into the demos, the teachers who took time out of a crazy point in the year to join us for this. And just, you know, just emphasize this is the beginning sort of conversation, and the more that we can increase our understanding, ask some really good and tough questions, because I do think the 6 viewpoints that we bring to the table all make the initiative a whole lot better in the long run. It does. As painful and as slow and, you know, as frustrating as it might be, I think working together will create an even stronger, continue our strengths and build on them. So anyway, so thank you for everybody's effort today, and I think we've done with the workshop topics, so let's adjourn, and we'll see each other soon enough, meaning
Thursday.
Thursday for our meeting, and some of us, we're adjourned, and some of us make it to convocation. Are you able to make it?
Yeah, I think 10:30, right?